Welcome to the Are We Nearly There Yet podcast. My name's Sonia, I'm wife to James and I'm mum to 4 children. I'm also the families lead at Kerith Community Church. This week is the last in our first series of the podcast, the series where we've had conversations with different people relating to different aspects of parenting and family life. We really hope you enjoyed being a part of it, and we would love to hear from you. Maybe you've got a story that you would love to share. Maybe you'd like to listen to a different aspect, a different subject, and you've got suggestions for us. Well, if that's you, or you've got any feedback on what you've heard so far, we would love to hear from you. Please email me. My email address is Sonia, Sonia, .hopkin@kerith.church. This week, though, for our final episode of Series 1, I sat down with my friend and colleague, Dan McNabb. Dan is the youth pastor, the youth champion at Kerith Community Church, and he is going to talk to us all about Generation Z. So welcome to Dan McNabb, to the Are We Nearly There Yet podcast. Welcome, Dan.
What a pleasure. It's great to be with Sonia.
It's great to have you with us. So Dan, some people listen to this who are not part of Kerith. Lots of people are part of Kerith, but there'll be people who don't know you as well as there'll be people who do. So let us know a little bit about yourself. Who are you? I'm really interested to know who is family to you. What was it like growing up? And tell us a little bit about yourself, will you?
Brilliant. Sure. Well, I'm Dan, part of a family of 5. We're actually all currently living under the same roof because of COVID. We're 5 adults under one roof, which has been exciting. And I actually think it's been better than having 5 adolescents under one roof. So actually, I am grateful for that. But yeah, I've got my parents, of course. I got an older sister, younger brother. So I'm the middle child.
Middle child.
Yep. Obviously the best child out of all of us. My parents were most lucky to have me. And growing up, I'm Bracknell based. I've lived in the same house all my life, and I had an interesting education past school. So once it was time for college, I did my first year of A-levels, and then after my first year, I got into music college on this scholarship scheme where I was too young to get into this college, but I got in a year early. So then I ended up leaving A-levels, well, conventional A-levels, and then moving to music college where I studied for a year. During that year, I decided to move on from music school and instead study theology. So then I went into a degree in theology and finished that. Through that time, I started working for the church, and that's how I ended up being youth pastor for Kerith. It was in that transition of being in music school and then realizing that actually my heart was in a different place. So.
And how old are you? Because the listeners won't know.
I think we'll keep everyone guessing, to be honest. No, I just turned 22.
Just turned 22. So you're on this podcast with us talking about all things parenting and family life. And I'm guessing at 22, you're not married, you don't have any kids. So people might be wondering, well, why is Dan on here? But this is very much a resource, I see, for parents of all different stages, and we can learn from people whether they've been parents or not. And I'm really interested in you coming along and sharing with us, because I am a mum of 4, and on Friday of this week, our eldest child is turning 13. We are about to enter teenage parenting years. We're going to have 2 in Kerith Youth from now, really. We've got 2 children in Kerith Youth. So yeah, we've kind of transitioned from being parents of children to parents of youth, parents of young people. And a lot of places, a lot of conversations you have, a lot of things you see, you read, you hear people saying, they talk and they're like, oh, good luck, or all the best, or teen years. Now, I don't want to be one of those people. I want to kind of champion young people and say, young people, you are great. So I want you to help me as a parent and all the other parents that are listening know our young people a little bit better, because they're grown up in a very different world, aren't they, to the world that I grew up in. So tell us a little bit about that, will you?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think you're so right. And, we're not kidding anyone. I'm definitely not a parental expert, but I had the chance of studying through my degree. I did a small module on Gen Z. So I had this anthropologist lecturer And I basically, after I was so intrigued by what he was saying, I just afterwards I got to meet up with him and I just grilled him everything that he knew about Gen Z and all the research that it showed. So I'm definitely not a parental expert, but I got to pick this guy's brain on Gen Z, and since then I've just been fascinated.
Firstly, I'd say, like, you don't have to be a parent to understand young people, and I think you're coming at it from a different perspective. Like, parents are coming at it. Parents can't be subjective in the same way because we're too emotionally involved with our children. So we need people like you in our children's lives. But what is Gen Z then? What is this Gen Z you talk
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're tuning into this podcast, we're going to be talking a lot about Gen Z. I wonder if there's a counter of how many times we're going to say the word Gen Z. Gen Z are the guys that are born between 1996 and 2015. So
Okay.
that age group, and they kind of find themselves merged, especially towards the upper end of that age bracket. They kind of merge themselves with millennials, so they are younger than millennials. I know the world kind of put a spotlight on millennials for a long time, but honestly, Gen Z are fantastic, and they are your teenagers or your youth, or soon to be youth. That's who they are. There's a really distinctive difference with Generation Z compared to any other generation that's been, and that's that this is the first ever generation who have had access to smartphones during their formative years. So during the formative years of the brain functioning and learning how to be a brain, they're the first ever generation to have iPads and iPhones and the cinema in their pocket at all times with Netflix. They're the first generation to have that in their formative years. So what that's done is it's had a massive impact on them. And that's kind of the study of Gen Z, is what is the impact they've had. Sonia, you're going to love this. There was a research piece that went out 10 years ago, and it was a survey for teenagers to answer what was their favorite place to hang out. 10 years ago, what do you think the top answer, what do you think it was?
10 years ago. Favourite place to hang out? I don't know. I don't know if there were still youth clubs and things. Was there, like, shops?
That was number 2.
Cinema.
So youth clubs was number 2. Number 1 was the park. How nice and innocent and simple is that? Like, that was the answer 10 years ago of the generation, was our favorite place to hang out is the park. The number 1 answer, they did it now just last year, so 10 years later, the number 1 answer was YouTube. My favorite place to hang out is YouTube, or like a relevant app like Instagram or something. So actually what it's done for Gen Z is something like social media. It's actually become a place that they hang out. It's not so much a concept, or it's not just ones and zeros to them. It's actually a place that they are. So the research would show that what Gen Z experience virtually is as stimulating to them as what they experience physically as well, because they've been exposed to this through the formative years of their brain. So they've been exposed to, YouTube and texting through the formative years of their brain. So actually, when they're engaging with things virtually, it's as stimulating to them as if, we were having a conversation face to face. So that is a distinctive of Gen Z. They have this weird stimulation with the virtual world, because to them, it's not a virtual world. It's real life. It's real life. So I think getting your head around Gen Z, that's the foundation of it. It's like, okay, the virtual world to them is not a virtual world. It's real life.
It's real community. And that's hard for someone like me to get my head around. Like you say, even 10 years ago, the place to meet was at the park. Well, it's a little bit longer than 10 years ago for me, since I'm now 42, don't mind saying that. And when I was younger, things were even different. I mean, I remember passing my driving test and we had like a family mobile phone. It was the size of a brick. You didn't have it switched on unless for emergencies. It was kept in the glove compartment. So if I broke down, I had a phone, pay as you go, mobile phone brick. Like that was and going to uni, like studying at uni was all done in the libraries, with actual real books and like computers. We used to dial up and it used to make this noise, like, I sound well old now, but some of the listeners will identify with this. You dial up the internet and it was like make this whirring sound for ages, and you'd have this big shared computer. Like, I don't know, 4,000 students would have like 2 computers between them. As you say, now they've literally got everything to hand and have done since they were born. So how do you see that affects in your role as youth champion, as a youth pastor at Kerith? How have you seen that affect relationally, how to reach out and reach out relationally with young people, for yourselves as team, as well as for those of us who are slightly older and as parents?
Great question. Something that you just said actually hits the nail on the head, though. You said when you studied at university, you studied with real books. I know what you mean by that, in a library, and you read an actual book in front of you. Now, someone from Gen Z would have no idea the distinction, what you mean. You say a real book to a teenager, they, to them, that is a Kindle as well. They might be, oh, does she mean not a magazine then? That's what they might be thinking. So that's how real the virtual world is to them. If you said a real book to them, they could think about that in the context of but how that has changed engaging with them, well, it's so interesting. What I found is Gen Z, they're really hard to impress. That's just never have parents been so uncool, I think, is probably the cry of every generation, let's be honest. But
true.
It's really, Gen Z are unique in that they're hard to impress, because we can't ignore the fact that they actually have had Hollywood in their pocket at all times. They walk around and they have access to any movie if they have a subscription to Netflix. And that is what is at their fingertips. So actually their threshold of what's impressive to them is been shaped by that.
Yeah.
Which is, so what we've found is Gen Z, they're not so much bothered about excellence, because they've been surrounded by excellence their entire life through their access to the internet and their access to Netflix and things like that. Not exclusively that, but because of their access to technology, they're not too bothered about excellence, because that's a new normal for them. What we've found is Gen Z, they crave authenticity. So they're not so bothered about excellence, but they really care about something being real and authentic. So, I'm going to be referring to a lot of research. Maybe at the end of the episode, I can just state my sources. But there's research that would show that all nightclubs are closing and coffee shops are packed. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And that just shows the cry of the generation, really. Nightclubs are closing. They're not bothered about the lights and the cameras and the action. They're not so bothered about that. But coffee shops are opening at a ridiculous rate. And what does that say? It says they're craving genuine community. They're craving not just content online that they can tune into. No, they're craving a human being in front of them that they can have an authentic time with. Because they might have access to a Hollywood movie that costs billions to make, but they're kind of sacking that off for a £3 coffee with a friend. So I mean, that would be a way to engage with Gen Z. They're not looking for you to be excellent or the coolest. They're just looking for authentic connection.
So that's reassuring, though, because it would be, if their favourite place to hang out is on YouTube, you'd think, well, goodness, what about authentic, real? I mean, they think that is authentic, that is real community to them, but actually there is still a place for that one-to-one connection. Then we haven't lost it all in terms of relational, being one-to-one in the company of somebody else. They still want to do that. It's more that the high quality production level excellence is there.
Definitely. And that's what we saw in the youth ministry. We had our previous youth ministry, our program was, we ran an event every single week. And that, in my mind, it wasn't exactly this, obviously, because it was church, but that's a nightclub way of running youth ministry. We were running events, and it was only a year and a half ago that we started really trying to implement small groups with our K crews, because that's what we realized was the cry of the generation. They're not so much craving the lights and the loud music, they're actually craving authentic connection. So that's what we've seen, the kind of turn of. And then we saw a spike in our engagement with our youth, because suddenly we were providing something for them that they actually wanted, that the world wasn't able to give them. There's no amount of Instagram scrolling in the world that could have given them an authentic connection. So, and that's, I'll tell you what, that is what's so unique about Gen Z. When Friends first came out, the TV show Friends, Sonia,
yes.
Were you someone who watched it every week?
Not every week, but I kind of got into it later on. But yeah.
So I was reading this really interesting article that was basically saying the difference between Gen Z and the past generations is that you could take Friends, for example. What would happen is everyone would watch that, they'd wait for it, then the next week the next episode would come out, and they would watch it.
Yeah.
And then they'd wait for it the next week. However, what's so interesting, we live in a world of binge watching, and there's no such thing as waiting. Everything is like straight away. If I don't know a trivia or general knowledge question, I'll just go straight to Google. There's no kind of like working for anything. And that has shaped Gen Z. I mean, we could speak about that for hours, but like you asked about engaging with Gen Z. Well, that's exactly what they want. They want engaging, because the reality is we don't really live in a world that shows Friends anymore. That's not really the way that entertainment works. Now it's like Love Island. And the contrast to that is like, you don't just watch Love Island. It's a lot more about like, you then go on Twitter and you vote in the polls, and you got to make sure you're voting for your person. You know, it's engaging. It's no longer just content that they're receiving. It's actually like teenagers would get so bored if it's just like a watching thing and they know it's just like them isolated alone. It's about engagement for them. That's what's really going to get Gen Z involved. They crave engagement, not just like content.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really easy for, I guess, people who grew up in a different time, maybe my kind of age, my generation, to maybe kind of, I think, oh no, you know, it's all bad, it's all wrong, but actually it's not at all. Like, advancements in technology, the virtual world has I mean, look at the last 6 months. If we didn't have all that, we wouldn't have been able to access community in the way that you guys have with K-Cruise over lockdown. Yeah, there's so many advantages to it. I guess there's a fear sometimes that that's going to take away from that real human connection. But from what you're saying, it sounds like actually what it does is make them crave that more. So that's encouraging to hear as a parent. We're going to talk a bit about some traits of the Gen Z generation, won't you?
Yeah, well, you got to understand the context of Generation Z, and the reality is they're quite an inspired generation. They're ambitious. They've got like an entrepreneur kind of spirit to them. What would have informed that is like the world that they've grown up in. Even was like, it's a world that is full of like one-hit wonders overnight. You know, like Snapchat just exploded overnight. I remember a world without Snapchat, and then suddenly it was literally in a day, Snapchat had hit the world and it had exploded. And TikTok, you know, even a year ago, TikTok didn't even exist a year ago, I'm pretty sure. And suddenly it's the biggest app in the world, and, you know, far surpassing Facebook and Instagram. It's like, how did this happen overnight? So that's kind of the context that Gen Z have grown up in. And the result of that, they have a can-do-it kind of attitude. So what that means is what we can see with Gen Z, it's really interesting. This is where it might get tricky as a parent. Gen Z aren't naturally following the conventional, traditional ways, milestones. They don't really care so much about chasing the 4-year degree, you know, getting that entry-level job and then working their way up within an organization. That's not really the milestones they're going for anymore. Gen Z would be a lot more attracted to apprenticeships. That is something that they're passionate about, and something that they feel like will make a difference. There's not so much inspiration to to have an office job and to be part of something that is just kind of a machine that ticks along. Gen Z, they want to be part of something bigger. They want to know that they're making an impact. There's a lot more passion around social action and the environment, and there seems to be these things that they're just kind of holding on to because they want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. But what it means as parents is it means that you might have a child who is not chasing the conventional way of things, and actually the way that they are going is not like, they might not want to do a degree. Instead, they might want to start their own business and do a degree online instead, which is so common. And what's kind of influenced that is really interesting. Like, what's obviously influenced it has been the rise in one-hit wonder successes, but also, and by one-hit wonder, I don't mean, actually, that's probably not the best way to, because they're not just one-hit wonders, because actually they're here to stay. Like Snapchat, they haven't done anything else but be Snapchat, but they're here to stay, which is why they have such an impact on Gen Z. So it's only Snapchat. It's not like they've made multiple apps. But that's why they're a one-hit wonder. But they've managed to stay. They're like Christmas songs. Oh, they're just like 12 songs, and they're always here every year. And that's kind of the world they live in. So it's not just like so much what the success has offered them. It's also like tradition, what tradition hasn't offered them. Like Blockbuster, it shut down. Woolworths, it shut down. You know, these were like the staples of society and shops. But, you know, these are traditional shops and traditional businesses, and they've grown up in a world where these traditional things were unsuccessful, and they fell through the ground and shut down. Churches, they've grown up in a church where actually pews are empty. And we know part of that is slight lie, in that we know that church attendance is on the rise, but typically pews are empty. And this is what's kind of been shaping Gen Z and their experience of the world, which is why they're chasing after these unconventional kind of ways, because that's what's becoming the new normal. So yeah, that was quite a spiel. I don't know what you picked up on that. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting to see it through your eyes. Like you're actually in this group yourself. You're one of the oldest in this group.
Yeah, tell you what's interesting. So everyone born, I can't remember the exact year, but there is towards the top age bracket of Gen Z. I'm quite unique. I'm a bit of a hybrid between Gen Z and Millennials, because I remember a time where I didn't have a smartphone. And actually, I remember when smartphones the first one I ever saw, not even smartphone, just mobile phone, flip phone. The first flip phone I ever saw was my uncle, and I was inspired, like that he had a phone in his pocket.
I loved a flip phone.
Yeah, and I mean, like you were saying about dial-up internet, I remember dial-up internet. You know, that was so being at the top of the age bracket of Gen Z, it's even hard for me to understand that the virtual world is as stimulating to them as the physical world in their brain, because to me that feels really far gone. But that's because I didn't have a phone through my formative years. So
do you think there's any, so because of my generation, the way where I've grown up was so different, there's a tendency to think it's negative. Do you see it as a negative as a younger guy yourself, young adult? So twofold question: do you see negatives? Do you see positives? A threefold question. But also, how as parents should we navigate any kind of tension that comes through those differences?
I mean, this is totally subjective, but for me, I can absolutely see the positive. Yes, I think the new world we live in now, the possibilities are endless for opportunity, for coverage. I mean, the things that have been exposed through COVID, you think about George Floyd's death and how that just shook the entire world. That would have been totally underground if there wasn't the internet and technology and the access that we have. So yeah, I can absolutely see the benefit. Here's where, and this is my opinion now, this is where we get subjective. Like, I personally, I can see the benefits. Yes, I can also see the negatives of the negative impact of social media on society, especially. And it's not all bad, absolutely not all bad. But I think it's something I do for my own life, something that we preach within the youth ministry often, is teaching teenagers the boundaries that you'd have with the virtual world. You just got to have boundaries with it. For example, like you would never let your youngest, or you would never let your twins, you'd never let them decide the shopping list for your house. You know, I can tell you, it would just be chocolate and crisp. Yeah. And you know, as well, you would never give even Hudson, you'd never give Hudson your credit card and say, all right, you're going to Tesco today. You can decide, buy whatever you want. You would never dream of that, because he'd walk out of that store with diabetes. You know, like that, you'd never do that. And I think as parents, got to be diligent with how much you're exposing your kids to the virtual world. Because the reality is, like, giving them a smartphone with no restrictions or without teaching them boundaries is the exact same as giving them your credit card and going to the sweet shop. It's not a healthy way to teach. And you do the same with food, you do the same with relationships, you do the same with alcohol with your kids. We've got to be doing the same with
and it's because there's a danger that there's just going to be a whole generation with no self-control if we just give them free. Definitely. You know, I mean, different parents will have different ideas on how to implement boundaries with these things, and it's for each individual family to decide what works best for them, and sometimes even individual, you want to be consistent among siblings, but sometimes individual children, you need to have a different boundary for a different child even within the same family. For us to hear you saying that, I reckon there'll be loads of parents that will play back that last bit that you just said to their young people, well, your youth pastor says you need to have boundaries. He has boundaries. So yeah, it's not free reign, because we are still responsible for them. They are still not fully formed adults, and we're still responsible for what they consume in every different aspect of life. And there's some great stuff that's come from it, some amazing positives, as you've mentioned, but there's also some negatives. And I like that credit card analogy. I've heard it before said, when it comes to the internet as well, think of the internet like a city. There's so many amazing places to explore in a city, but you don't let your kids go off walking in the middle of the night down a dark alleyway in a city. Like, you just don't let them do that. So
fantastic analogy. And I think the boundaries are in two ways. Yes, boundaries with time, but that's not what I'm only talking about. Definitely give boundaries with time, and have no tech moments with your family, dinner, like that's even something we do, 5 adults in the house, we still do no tech dinner, with no tech anywhere inside. So, but I'm not just talking about time, I'm also talking about the content. You want to put boundaries around what and you might think, oh no, it's fine, my Jimmy wouldn't. And it's like, no, seriously, your Jimmy will find things that you will have no idea about. Yeah. And because that is,
or be sent things as well, even if they're not looking for it themselves, to be sent things from friends.
And I think you can win as parents when you just set that up in advance. And, there's so many ways you can set boundaries around what they're able to Google search and those kind of things. And yeah, I think it's definitely complex, but boundaries are so important.
And I think as parents, it's a continual conversation that we've got to keep having with our young people, and knowing that we're wanting to teach them to be self-sufficient, and being a parent is like raising your child to be fully formed individual standalone adults that can do their own thing, make their own sensible choices, like help equip them to have good self-control. But along the way, you don't just give it all to start with, do you?
Definitely. And we haven't even touched on with Gen Z that they're explorers. Like, they will go to places, they stretch the boundaries. And that's why the church and our faith and what we believe the Bible to be true is more important than ever, because we're living in a more subjective world where truth is whatever I want it to be. And whether you like it or not, that is the world that Gen Z are living in, which means they are exploring and they're pushing the boundaries of what they know to be true. So if they have heard the stories of what you can find on the internet, you got exploring boys, and actually it's not just boys. I think we taint boys with like, oh yeah, it's guys who are going to struggle with pornography and these guys. No, it's absolutely across the board. It's not a gender issue at all. It's a generation issue. And yeah, that's why it's better to be diligent, and because your kids will search, because that's their name. Yeah.
I'm interested what you just said about truth. Like, obviously Gen Z is all young people, but most of us that will be listening to this will be Christian parents. Not everybody might be, but most of us are. And we need to set ourselves apart and that's difficult for young people when they're facing all the pressures of their friends are doing everything. It was difficult, 30 years ago. It was just a different set of, different set of circumstances and different challenges. It's not something that's new and fresh just to this generation, but there is more option, more to explore, more different things, and it's easier access. But as Christian parents, how do you, in terms of pointing young people to truth, because they can explore and they can find a different theory for absolutely everything out there, can't you? Somebody's said they've proved something, but we're actually saying, no, what the Bible says is truth. And people in the world is coming at them with a load of different things. Have you got any advice or thoughts on that? How as parents we can help equip our young people to stand on the truths of the gospel?
Fantastic. Yeah. I think small question.
Yeah, if you could just solve that for us right now, Dan.
My only input, and again, it's not tried and tested because I'm 22, but my input would be, from what I know of the generation, make truth and biblical truth part of the mundane. So from the way that you discipline your kids, the way that your siblings would engage with each other, around the dinner table, it's really quick and easy to make it about God, and giving highs and lows of your day, and in the lows being okay with the lows, because the solution is, well, let's pray now, we'll make that part of grace, or because Tilly's had a hard day, we're just going to lift up Tilly during grace as well. So it's I mean, the mundane stuff, I mentioned grace there quite nonchalant, but that makes a massive difference. Talked about discipline. When you're disciplining your kids once they've been in a fight, it's making them understand, like, not just what they've done wrong, but the process of resolution. And like, do you forget, twins, Elwood, do you forgive each other? And if you do, brilliant. That's a great step. Why are we forgiving? Because we know we are ultimately forgiven by God. It's in the mundane that you're reaffirming truth. And then I think on the flip side, I'd say, let them see all sides of the coin. Like, let them see all sides of what the society is calling truth, and let them decide what they think truth is. Because the reality is, and not all, I'm about to say a sweeping statement over the generation, but like, there's a lot of wacky truth out there. There just is. And I'm sure, like, I trust our teenagers in our youth ministry to decide what they think is more of a firm foundation, what Jesus is saying, what the Bible is saying, or what certain aspects of the culture is saying.
It's trusting them, and it's trusting God that he's got them, like they're his. Actually, we're kind of like stewards of them for him, and he will, we can pray for them, we can weave all this into the mundane, we can do what we can do, but ultimately it's a two-way relationship between them and him. It's not us to step.
And that last point I said, the reality is, I know I just said, like, let them experience all part, what culture is saying, let them experience that so that they can decide for themselves. The reality is they're going to do that anyway. So that point is more for you as a parent, your peace of mind, because the reality is they're going to go to school and they're going to experience the whole spectrum of truth and what society is saying is truth. So that's kind of the context that they're in.
Yeah. Was you going to say a little something about change before we wrap up with our final question?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little footnote, really, of something that might help in this season. So Gen Z, something that's really unique of their generation is their relationship to change. And generally, their relationship with change is quite good. And we've definitely seen that in the youth ministry. Their relationship with the change of everything that happened to them straight away in COVID, when everything got taken away from us overnight, and we all know the story. The reality was Gen Z was smashing it. They were fine. I mean, I was inspired by some of our teenagers and their attitude. We didn't really hit a problem with Gen Z, or like the youth, sorry, when everything was going carnage and crazy. Well, the research would suggest, why is that? Their relationship with change is quite good, because they live in a rapidly fast changing world. This is what's formed their brain. They've not just had one smartphone, they've had 3 and 4, but they get a new one every year because it updates. And so that's the pace of life that they're used to. They're used to a fast changing world. So actually for Gen Z, change is okay, because that's what their world is. The world changes. What isn't okay is when nothing changes. Suddenly their world is like turned upside down because nothing's changed. Which is why about May, we'd been in lockdown for 3-4 months. That kind of like threshold of time, that's when we start hitting some really difficult. Well, that's when we just wanted support the youth most, because that's when they were struggling most, because nothing in their world changed. Suddenly the Xbox is boring because they've had nothing but the Xbox for months, and they've not even been to the shops in months because mummy and daddy have been doing the shopping because it's too dangerous. Like they've had no change of scenery, and that's when their world started to change.
Yeah, because they were thriving on change usually.
Yeah. Whereas like for everyone else in the world got flipped upside down when we all went into lockdown because it was like change that we could not handle.
Yeah.
Whereas that kind of the devastation effect, it was delayed for teenagers. So it's more just a footnote of context, really, of like, think about your teenagers and their relationship with change. Yeah, because for them it's a lot easier than it is probably for you.
Yeah. That's really useful, Dan. I think those of us who are about to be parenting this age of young people, or are in the thick of it at the moment, you know, there's always every generation, you know, there's hormones, there's changes happening to bodies, and, you know, friendships and pressures maybe at school, and loads of different stuff going on. And every generation will have this kind of teenage years parental, I was going to say teenagers versus parents, but I don't want to frame it in that language. You know, there's sometimes tension, you know, we know there's tension, but there's also so much goodness that can come out of this season. And to hear and speak that actually we can have really positive relationships. It's not like they're going to hit 13 and it's all going down the pan. Like, no, let's maintain and let's strive towards having those positive, close, open relationships with our children. Just because they hit a certain age doesn't mean that's all going to change. And I think in doing that, one of the first things is trying to understand the culture and the generation that they are growing up in, which is so vastly different. You know, there'll be parents of teenagers that will be older than me, and there'll be parents of teenagers that will be younger than me, depending when they had their kids. But for everyone, it's a different experience from child to what parent was. And I think it's really, you've, you know, shone a light on some areas that will hopefully be helpful to parents in understanding like certain behaviors or certain conversations that have happened, and you think, oh yeah, well that's because they approach things differently, and because generationally and technologically there's been such a shift, such a quick explosion over the last few years. So yeah, thank you for coming to talk to us about that. We're going to move on to our last question of the podcast, which is something I ask everyone that comes on. So you won't know this yet, but you might remember from being a child yourself on a long journey with your parents, and one of you or your big sister or younger brother asking, oh, we're nearly there yet, to your mum and dad. And as a parent, that can sometimes be a frustrating question that's asked every few seconds. But like, I've been asking people that come on this podcast saying, well, actually, as adults, we're often the ones that are on the journey, learning to be parents, like learning to communicate with young people, whatever role people are taking in that. And you, as youth pastor, youth champion for Kerith Community Church, you know, if you were going on a journey of your time as a youth pastor, thinking of a journey, you pack up a bag, you pack up a suitcase, what essential items would you have taken with you on this journey, looking back at when you started to now? What essential items would you take on in your journey, in your ministry with young people?
That's a good question.
That's a long question, sorry. It was very long-winded.
Okay, I think I have an answer. It's actually quite a nerdy answer. I would actually say I would trust in the research that experts say and be okay with the unconventional. I think that's what I would say. Let me unpack it. So trust the research. Like, there was so much about Gen Z I had no idea about. And if I didn't learn about it, I would have reached them how I wanted to be reached. And it would have never worked because they wouldn't have responded to a thing. So yeah, that's what we can tend to do with life, is we engage with people the way that we want to be engaged with, and we don't take into account contextualizing the needs of each different person. So that's what I mean by trust in the research. Like, just, it was good to humble myself and go, oh, okay, I might be young, but oh my goodness, these guys need something way beyond that I would have ever thought about. So trust in the research, and then being okay with the unconventional. What that means is the research led me to the place that we had to do youth ministry in quite an unconventional way. We had to turn it on its head. We had to change the priorities away from, because youth ministry to me was the most amazing events you could ever dream of. And you stand in a massive crowd and you get the goosebumps, and, you know, that was youth ministry for me. So that's how I was trying to reach teenagers, until I realized the priority of the generations changed. So I've got to be okay with reaching them unconventionally. And wow, now we're a year on in that process of changing and changed the priorities of our youth ministry to be around authentic community. Now we're a year on, oh my gosh, I'd never go back. Like, just the strength of the youth ministry now, and the teenagers that we have, the way that they engage, they're engaging in a way that is like, we're finally meeting their needs. You know, we went with the unconventional, we're now meeting their needs. So I guess that'd be my nerdy answer. Trusting the research, and then just being okay with that, where that research takes you.
That's really useful, because I think we can draw parallels with that as parents as well, like really getting to know our children, and getting to understand what makes them tick, what's different about them. Are there any particular books you've read along the way? You can't offer to head then.
Tons. I mean, I think a good place to start, a lot of the good Gen Z research I would look up Soulscape Christian Charity. They've done a ton of research on Gen Z. They are fantastic. So they just do a lot of studies and things, and then a lot of like contextualized writings off the back of them. So Soulscape, really good. There's a book called Raising Boys. I think there might be Raising Girls as well, I'm not sure, but I read a bit of Raising Boys, which is outstanding. Can't remember the author, but that's really good. There's a podcast called This Cultural Moment, which is Mark Sayers in Australia and John Mark Comer in somewhere in America.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic when you're thinking about contextualizing culture. They've just nailed it. They've got really good stuff there. And engaging with technology, that they've done a great job there. So This Cultural Moment podcast is fantastic. There'd probably be 3 good starting places.
That's great. Thank you, Dan. On behalf of all parents everywhere, to you and all youth ministry teams everywhere, not just in our church, we haven't got empty pews. We don't have pews, but we don't have empty seats in our empty chairs in our youth ministry, and it's largely because of what you guys are doing and pouring into our young people. So thank you for helping us understand them a little bit better. Thank you for what you do, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Sonia.
Oh, what a great way to end season 1 with Dan. Those of us who are parenting in that stage of life, I hope you found that really helpful. He mentioned some resources at the end there. There's a book, Raising Boys. Yes, he's right, there is another book as well called Raising Girls, both of them by the same author, Steve Biddulph. That's Biddulph. There's also an organisation called Soulscape. Their website address is soulscape.org.uk. And another podcast is a great one, This Cultural Moment by Mark Sayers. Why don't you go and check out those resources? Don't forget, if you've got any feedback for us at all, whether that's on this series 1 or you've got ideas for us moving forward, we would absolutely love to hear from you. It would really help us if you would subscribe to the podcast, share it with a friend, maybe leave a review, and then more people will see it, more people will have access to it. But thank you for joining us on this journey on Are We Nearly There Yet?